Olga joins me now. Briefly, I'm afraid, Olga, given the hour, but it's a terrific book. What do Russians think?
Oh, boy. I think Russians think at this point that they're not coming through, that nobody is making any kind of effort to understand them, how Russia operates, what is behind their thinking, why they're upset about this thing or the other. And in the end, I think there's no shared facts between the West and the Russians on everything that Russia is being blamed for or is allegedly involved in. And most Russians think that it's gone beyond the point at which anything can be done. Unfortunately, I think they're thinking now that they are a fortress under attack, and there's no point in trying to do anything or persuade anybody. And that's the feedback I received from the Russians, from my book or from my attempt to stand in an election. Everybody said, "Why are you trying anything? There's no point. There's no point. They're too far gone." So I think that Russians, unfortunately, think that they've perhaps sort of lost in the public relations war in the West, and they are not. I don't think they know what to do about it.
Well, look, I had dinner in a Russian restaurant last night in Beecham Place, Borscht and Tears. It was very nice indeed. But it's true that every other person in the restaurant was Russian. There were no British people at all in the restaurant. On the other hand, though, Olga, there's 1 million people watching this right now on RT and listening to it on Sputnik. So it's not really true that Russia does not speak back, is it?
Yeah, I'm trying to, but I don't think Russia does. Certainly not to the extent that it is being accused of. I think Russia has been accused of. People in America particularly, and in Britain, they have this idea of a Russian superstate that's behind everything and, under every bed, that has some kind of coherent strategy for public relations.
Winning every election.
Yeah, exactly. But the truth is, Russia is, and I'm sad to admit it, but Russia is chaos. Some Russian people do some things here and there because they think this is right, as I do. But they're usually doing it entirely on their own without any coordination, and quite often Russia is not even, behind them in any sense. And most certainly they're usually don't speak with each other, and almost none of them get the medal for what they're doing. So quite a lot of whatever Russians do something in the West, usually they do it because they have their interests in the West. For example, I, as an immigrant, have to live with the attitude towards Russia that exists, and I'm trying to fix it because it affects Russians in the diaspora. In America, in England, we are affected by what the world thinks about Russia, even though we don't live in Russia. And I think, other Russians have maybe done some sort of interventions because they have financial interests, business interests, in other countries. But it's not the mother alien ship of Russia that's, sending everybody a signal. It's an extremely chaotic and redundant.
There's 150,000 Russians living in London. That's a lot of people. A very large number of them have not only are not operating for Russia, many of them are operating against Russia. They are oligarchs in exile from Russia. Isn't that the case?
That is the case, but I think that those people actually are sort of, not the real diaspora, right? The real diaspora are the Russians that are doing their best to integrate themselves into the lives of the countries that they live in. I've lived in the West for 25 years. I'm trying to stand for parliament. I've genuinely, until Russophobia and Russiagate a few years ago, I haven't really even been on topic of what's going on with Russia. My life is in the West, and so is the life of most people in the diaspora. Those little kind of oligarchs, as you call them, or all the various, exiles, which usually are in exile because they are wanted for crimes in Russia. That's usually the sort of focal point of their disagreement. They live every day in the sort of this imaginary Russia in their heads that they are obsessed with. Right, but that's not real life. they're not, often, even after years in the West, they have no real connection and understanding of the countries they're in. They're all focused just on, their kind of subversionary process.
It wasn't always thus, though, Olga. I mean, the restaurant I'm talking about opened in 1965. It's the oldest Russian restaurant in London. 1965. Yuri Gagarin was king. Our wartime alliance was such that Stalin was described affectionately in the British media as Uncle Joe and all the rest. It wasn't always thus. What changed?
Well, firstly, I think obviously the Cold War. But today, quite many young people in the UK and in America don't even know that Russians fought alongside the British and the Americans in the Second World War.
There's
literally generations of millennials who don't know that the Red Army took Berlin. And I talk about it in the book. There's this chapter called Grandchildren of War. One of the big reasons Russians are upset at everybody is because the revisionism of Second World War that writes the Soviet Union out of it is really hurtful for many people. Because
not only that, Olga, we are lionizing and defending and perhaps ready to fight a war for the very people in the Ukraine, for example, but not only the Ukraine, who were fighting alongside the SS, who were murdering Jews on the streets of the Ukraine. They're now our friends and allies in the Ukraine.
Well, I can tell you something about Ukraine, though. I think, obviously, they're not the actual people, right? They're the young people. There are a lot of young people right now who, during the 1990s, grew up.
Yeah, I mean the heirs to that tradition. They carry the banners of Bandera, the fascist collaborators.
Yes, but this all has to do with the sort of the rhetoric on this sort of Russian-Ukraine topic that's been upped on both sides, I must say. But, the young people don't understand what the war was like, and they don't have the ability to take it seriously, because in the 90s we had a bit of a kind of propaganda gap, and so the millennials grew up without a real feeling for what the war was. I think, of course, there are these elements in Ukraine, but they're doing this just sort of to upset, I think, the Russian majority. However, I think it's important to understand that I think the Russian position is that Russia and Ukraine are the same. Russians and Ukrainians are ultimately the same people. Russia is when everybody says that Russia is about to go to war with Ukraine, it misses the ultimate point. The Russian position is that the Ukraine, nobody in Russia sees Ukrainians as a different nation, or for that matter, Ukraine as a different country. But it doesn't mean that they're going to, to invade it for acting out. For example, one of my children hasn't talked to me for a while, and she blames me for all manner of things, as I hear from other family members. And there's been a lot of rhetoric on both sides, but I'm not going to go to war with her. She's my child. I love her. And this is sort of how Russians view Ukraine. I don't think in reality we are a bit upset and confused by what Ukraine is doing, but I don't think nobody's going to, move the military into their child's bedroom because they're, acting out. And so far as that, and I think all this sort of, yes, there are these horrible, nationalists and the Bandera sympathizers and all that. But ultimately, it is just, because the adults in Ukraine have allowed themselves to go into this sort of rhetoric that allows that. But it's, it's just, I think, a sort of I still think most Russians view this as some sort of a family conflict gone bad, rather than foreign aggression.
Than an enemy. Well, look, I wish we had more time. It's a terrific read, What Russians Think, by Olga Childs. I hope that your sales get a good little boost, Olga. You deserve it. Thanks very much indeed for joining us.